Discretionary listener participation is advised for the following pro wrestling podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Stick to Wrestling podcast. My name is John McAdam. This is Stick to Wrestling, where if you give us 60 minutes, perhaps indeed, we'll give you a wicked good and rawbone podcast. Stick to Wrestling is a classic pro wrestling podcast. We mostly focus on the 70s and 80s, and today we're going to focus on the 80s. And let me bring in my co-host, Steve Gennarelli. Steve, thanks for coming back.
Thanks for inviting me, John. And to start this week's show, I actually was in touch with a longtime observer reader, a good friend of mine, Klon from Melbourne, if you remember that name from the past.
I know Klon. I've met Klon.
He's a really nice guy, and I had the pleasure of being in his home. He told me just right before we started recording that the Vince McMahon book that recently came out, Ringmaster, it has actually hit the New York Times bestseller list.
I hear that's not, I want to say not a very good book. I hear that if you're a wrestling fan, you'll learn nothing from it.
I actually was at the Barnes & Noble recently, and the book is very thin, considering it's supposed to be about his whole life story. Mm-hmm. And you can just tell by just kind of skimming through it that it's more about, I think, the business things that have happened in his life and more about, just the big picture of his life. It doesn't really go into the stuff that we're looking to hear about, like the relationships and ins and outs. And I think it is a bit of a disappointment.
Well, I say that it doesn't sound like the book was written for you and I, Steve. It seems like it was more for a very casual wrestling fan.
Yeah, but I'm surprised it's doing so well. I guess anything with his name on it and coming out around the time of WrestleMania, just it's selling a lot of copies. I guess.
I mean, good for whoever wrote it. I'm happy for them. Two things. I have to tell you my Klon story. We're in Baltimore in '90, and me and my friends were a bunch of rowdy kids. I kind of jump on his back, right? And Klon's like, how do you know there's not something wrong with me that, like, you'll hurt me if you do that? And I'm like, oh, man, I felt bad. I guess I can't just jump on people whenever I feel like it. And secondly, I want to talk about not the last show, but the show before, where I came on and I was, like, not feeling well. I was exhausted. I hadn't slept well for 2 nights. And by the time I got done recording Stick to Wrestling, I was fine because it provided the stimulation that I needed for on that day. And it just advice for everyone. And I knew this coming in. I knew this 2 weeks ago. I just didn't listen to myself. If you're not feeling well, if you're tired, get out of bed. I know it is instinct to kind of slow down, whatever. No, go out for a run, go out for a walk, jump in the pool if you have that option, shoot some baskets, do some push-ups, whatever. Don't just sit around like not feeling well. Just, do something to get rolling. And Steve, you and Stick to Wrestling got me rolling. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Words to live by, John.
There you go. We are going to do a show with lots of audio today. We have audio from the AWA, the American Wrestling Association, from 1983. We are going to celebrate that 40-year anniversary. Let's hear the intro for this fabulous AWA All-Star Wrestling show.
All-Star Wrestling. All-Star Wrestling is sanctioned by the AWA, the American Wrestling Association. All-Star Wrestling presents the top professional wrestlers from the United States, Canada, England, Germany, Australia, Mexico, Poland, Japan. The greatest professional wrestlers from throughout the world. And now to the ring for All-Star action.
Poland. That was the most entertaining thing about that segment. We're all over the place. We're in Poland.
No, that's great that they mentioned Poland. But when I heard all that great intro, I was thinking to myself, back in the early 70s, and maybe you can remember this, John. Do you remember, like, it seemed like every day if you're watching TV, like old reruns of old shows, they always had these commercials for blasting caps. Children, be careful walking down the street. Do not touch this. A blasting cap, something that could destroy a building. Do you remember that?
I don't. A blasting cap. What is that?
I think it must be something used to detonate buildings or in construction sites, but that AWA Roger Kent promo, it just sounded like, young people of the world of Gotham City, be careful. That's kind of what it sounded like.
I'm totally with whoever that person was. I think you should be over 18 in order to run or use a blasting cap, whatever a blasting cap may be. Steve, you made a really astute observation about the AWA during this time period. They had a secondary title in 1985, the America's title, held by Sergeant Slaughter. This promotion needed a secondary title way, way, way before that. And by then it was too late.
The WWF, as we've kind of spent a lot of time talking about that, they transitioned from the 70s to the 80s by trying to do new things that would kind of spark interest or keep people interested. Key among them was probably bringing in the Intercontinental title to headline a lot of the B and C town shows. The AWA, I think one of their biggest things, besides not having a secondary title, they put on good shows. They had great stars involved. But to me, they never really did much in the way of angles or things that would kind of move the storyline around. I mean, if you got the Observer in the 80s and you were reading about WWF, 1 week it's Ron Bass hits Brutus Beefcake with his spurs. Next week it's Randy Savage hits Steamboat with his ring bell. I mean, these things would happen every week just to kind of push that storyline along, or maybe begin a new storyline in the wrestling. But to the AWA, it just seemed like nothing really ever happened.
I agree with you. It was a lot like the WWF in the late 70s, early 80s, is that, you had a handful of angles every year and that's it. And then when the WWF went national, they went more, storyline based. Okay, this is why I'm coming to see Ron Bass and Brutus Beefcake. It's a grudge match. And, but then again, the more I think about it, the AWA, when I'm going to like get every AWA fan mad at me. Can you remember a good AWA angle? Like, wow, I like that one.
Yeah. I mean, the only things I remember, and again, this is coming from somebody that really didn't get to see them until they hit ESPN. I mean, the only things I can remember were like, the blaster breaking through the wall, attacking Larry Nelson, and these odd and end type things. I mean, in their defense, by the time that ESPN happened for them, the roster had been really depleted, and by the time they were doing these tapings at the showboat, they didn't know who was going to be there. So you had like Dick Slater 1 week, you had Ron Garvin the next taping, you had somebody else the next time, and you couldn't really put together these storylines or these long-term angles because you never knew who was going to show up.
That is an excellent point. You're right. It was at the end, it was a little bit like running, Memphis. Like, this guy's not going to be here in 4 weeks, so don't exactly buy a house for him. I mean, but I remember they did one angle in '85. It was really simple. Jim Garvin comes to the ring, starts talking with Rick Martel, the AWA champion. He and Precious get in his face, and Garvin suckers him and runs his head into the ring post and bloodies him up. And that was it. And I was like, okay, that's good. Now we have an angle, and you guys kept it nice and simple. But then, as we went along, I want everyone to know this, people in general did not get into the whole Colonel De Beers, the racist South African guy, going after Jimmy Snuka. Like, everyone was repulsed by that, or everyone I knew was like, this is garbage, get it out of here. And it just, the AWA never seemed really creative. But with all of that said, in 1983, they were doing killer business, and they were doing killer business before and after that.
Yeah, I mean, the AWA, even though we were busting on it here for the beginning of the show, I mean, they have an excellent history, a great history. The 60s is when the promotion began, right around 1960. Verne was a very well-respected Olympic wrestler, amateur wrestler. He had been one of the in the original wave of TV wrestling in the late 40s, early 50s for national wrestling. He was one of the known names, and had been in the championship picture with the NWA. Always regarded highly, and through a series of things, he became the promoter of that area with Wally Carbo, and in the 60s and then the 70s, he had a great promotion, a highly successful promotion that just started to expand and get bigger and bigger, and really there was nothing but success in the 60s and the 70s, and even the early 80s was very successful.
No, and yeah, I mean, even after Vince McMahon expanded, people act like, as soon as Hogan left, the AWA died. No, the AWA had a very strong 1984 and a pretty strong 1985. 86 is when the ship really hit the rocks.
Yeah, I think what happened, you had a lot of people that jumped from, and I know some of the people have said it's almost predatory the way Vince went after the AWA talent.
I wouldn't say almost, but go ahead.
Okay. So, and I've got a list here in front of me. I went through all their 1983 matches, and these guys that I'm going to mention to you would all be in the WWF by the end of 83 or even in 84 at one point. So you have Pat Patterson, Rene Goulet, Hulk Hogan, Ken Patera, Puppy Dog Peliquin, Mad Dog Vachon, Bobby Heenan, Spike Huber, Jesse Ventura, Blackjack Lanza. Brutus Beefcake was wrestling there as Ed Leslie in the 83, and lastly David Schultz. And of course, not to mention Mean Gene, who was so important to the whole thing. But all those guys would end up in New York, and Bobby Heenan and other wrestlers, Jesse Ventura, would soon follow. And Verne was just a really tough guy to work for, I guess. He was a good payoff guy. A lot of people say that, but like Jim Brunzell has told the story that he really wanted to stay in the Twin Cities or stay with the AWA. And this is after already so many of these guys had left, and he sat down with Verne and basically said, I am, New York is calling me, but I want to stay because I have family here, and he wanted to get like a guarantee of like $85,000 a year or something like that. That was certainly within reason or seemed reasonable, and Verne basically said, if you think you can do better, go ahead, leave, something like that. And this is a guy who had been there since day one. Since his career began. So there was really no kind of sense of loyalty, or Verne was a really hard guy to get along with at times.
One thing I forgot to do when we started up the show, we have a Stick to Wrestling Facebook group, which you can be part of. And the thing came up about Verne Gagne, the rumor that Verne Gagne wanted to pay the Iron Sheik $100,000 to break one of Hulk Hogan's legs and thus end Vince McMahon's plan on expanding nationally. And I remember stories like that from Brunzell, where Verne's like, if you want to go, just go. Bobby Heenan said the same thing. He sat down with the Gagnes, and they were nice enough to him, but he was like, if you want to go, go. And that's why I don't believe that story at all. Like, Verne just kind of didn't care who he lost. It's just, he saw the wrestlers as somewhat fungible.
Yeah, and I think that really in the long run hurt his promotion, because I think to a lot of the fans were loyal to the AWA. Hulk Hogan had been one of their star performers, and of course Mean Gene was right at the lead of the show every week, telling you what's going on, what's happening. And to see those two go to New York and end up being on NBC with Saturday Night's Main Event and then the cartoon show on CBS, I could see where they could think that their local product may have been old-fashioned or not as important, and I could see where maybe more eyes went toward the WWF than the AWA, and that's basically what happened over time. Just the AWA machine kind of got weaker, and the WWF machine got stronger, and we all know how everything turned out after that.
Bill Watts tells a story about Verne Gagne. Okay, I forget where they were, but they were like, "Oh, let's go out and get some Mexican food," and they get in the car, and Verne's like, "There's a Mexican place. Let's stop there." And Bill Watts is like, "No, I know a place, just a few miles away that's really good." And Verne's like, "Bill, Mexican food is Mexican food." And Watts is like, Vern, that's your problem. You think Mexican food is Mexican food and wrestling is wrestling, and it's not.
Yeah. There's definitely more to it than that. But I want to hear some more of these great clips to take me back to the early 70s, the days of blasting cabs.
Well, I don't know if they still had blasting cabs in 1983, but that's really all I have right now.
Okay, all right. Let's
go to clip number 2 with Wahoo McDaniel and Rick Martel.
Into the Mile High City, off and running All-Star Wrestling. What a week for promoter Gene Reed. Listen to this, ladies and gentlemen. You know, high flyers Greg Gagne, Jim Brunzell signed for a title defense on the next card, and their opponents none other than Ken Patera and Jesse the Body Ventura. More on that in a moment. Wahoo McDaniel, come on in. Former Denver football great, and of course, I know a longtime friend of Red Miller, now coaching the Denver Gold.
That's right. I talked to Red Miller on the phone. He's invited me to come out and watch him work out, and I'm looking forward to coming to Denver and seeing him work out and alleviate a little problem that has been involving me out there.
Wait a minute. What are you talking about? A problem that has been involving you here?
Well, I've been talking to Gene Reed, and I'm not going to deny the fact that I've been trying to get a match with Heenan. They said, well, he's a manager. He's not a wrestler. Well, I tell you one thing, Heenan. You want to stick your nose in people's business, then you're going to have to put the tights on. And I'm going to tell you, if you get in the ring with me, and if Gene Reed can get this match signed, I'm going to take you in that match, and I'm going to hold you in that ring, and I'm going to make you suffer. And when I get through with you, then I'm going to Gene Reed, and I'm going to get my hands on Bockwinkel again.
I thank you very much. I am certain Mr. Heenan would be very apprehensive if that were to take place. Rick Martel, come on in. Rick Martel, yes, you're signed on the next card against Sheik Adnan LKC.
Well, I have one thing to say. I'm not finished with LKC. He tried to cripple me before, tried to put me out of wrestling, but Sheik, I guarantee you one thing. You're not going to go away from me without paying your dues. Thank you very much.
All right, Rick Martel, brilliant star out of Quebec City, Quebec in Canada, and one of the top contenders certainly today for the World's Heavyweight Championship.
Wow, a 1983 USFL Denver Gold reference. By the way, I wasn't ready for that one, even though I'm the one who made the recording, but I did it like 2 or 3 months ago. I'll tell you what, I want to remind everyone that anytime we use audio on this show, it is for educational and review purposes only. And we're very fair here at Stick to Wrestling. We're going to allow Bobby Heenan, Jesse Ventura, and Ken Patera to retort. Let's hear from them.
Did you hear Wahoo McDaniel? He wants to eliminate a problem, namely you.
Oh, I happen to be a problem to him. He's a problem to professional wrestling. He does nothing but get in people's way and sticks his nose in people's business. He is constantly griping. From the day he gets up, from the time he gets up to the time he goes to bed, he's whining and he's griping. I don't want to hear nothing about Wahoo McDaniels. I got bigger and better plans. I'm planning a party for the heavyweight tag team champions of the world, Patera and Ventura. This is what I want, and this one's for Bobby Duncombe.
All right, Jesse, the Body Ventura now, teaming up with Ken Patera.
Let me tell you something, a few facts. When Big Bad Bob Duncombe got hurt, Mr. Heenan came to me, Jesse the Body, because he knows that I have great knowledge of the high criers. If you think back a couple of years, it was Gagne and Brunzell that stole the title from Mr. Adrian Adonis and Jesse the Body.
Well,
so what man in wrestling would know enough to be able to step in immediately with Ken Patera and win the tag team championship of the world? Ain't that right, Kenny?
Isn't that the truth? This is the time. This is the place. Denver and the High Flyers are going down. Just like you stole the belts in Green Bay a few years ago. Well, we're not going to have to steal them. We're going to take them off your waist. We're going to beat you in the middle of the ring. 1, 2, 3. And we will become the new World Tag Team Champion.
Get a shot of these bodies.
Get a shot of the arms. Look at the arms. Can the High Flyers match that? Look at the definition on the chest. Look at the back. There's not a goat roper in the whole Western Hemisphere.
Okay, those are 3 guys who definitely know how to do an interview, especially, well, Patera was great, but Bobby Heenan was off the charts, and Jesse Ventura. Steve, I have been asked a bunch of times, like, okay, what should the AWA have done after losing Hulk Hogan? I came up with this maybe a year ago, which is about 39 years too late. I would have turned Jesse Ventura babyface and made him the top star.
That's something I've never heard anybody mention before, but I think there would have been some validity to that. He already had some cult fans rooting for him because he was kind of a hip guy and unique, and he was local. And if they needed like a local hero to go by, and he was a rock and roll guy. I mean, that could have actually worked.
Verne would have never gone for it. It's just not his style of champion. I mean, I think he would have rolled out a 50-year-old Billy Robinson before he did something like that. But Wahoo McDaniel in the AWA, he had been in the Carolinas for, consistently for the better part, almost an entire decade, made a couple of shots in Florida, Georgia, Southwest, but he was more or less homesteading in Mid-Atlantic. He had been a big star in the AWA early to mid 70s, and now he's back.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the really downfalls of the AWA in this period. They had so many of these older guys who had been super, super over. They mentioned Bobby Duncombe on the promo, who apparently got injured. Wahoo McDaniel. Baron von Raschke was still very popular at the time. Sheik Adnan LKC. They even used Dick the Bruiser. They had a lot of older talent that was used, probably more than they should have been. And in Wahoo McDaniel in the promo we heard, they're referencing his football career. The guy retired like in the late 60s. Here we are in 83. And Wahoo, I guess, was liked by Verne, and I think he liked people who had a sporting background. And he would become an AWA booker during the dying days of the AWA. But yeah, it just I think every time that Vince took one of their younger stars, they would get a star from the past like a Wahoo or a Billy Robinson and kind of hope that they could be enough to make the fans just through the wrestling, not notice who was missing. But after a while, I think the fans realized that all the young talent is gone, and now that we just have the old stars of the past are still here.
That's all very true. In 1984, the AWA Tag Team Champions were Baron von Raschke and the Crusher. And it's like, you've got to be kidding me. You go look at the wrestling on the other channel that's on now, the WWF, and look what you're doing. And it's like, I understand, look, there's no easy solution to, okay, Vince McMahon is coming to town with Hulk Hogan, Gene Okerlund, and the rest of the WWF roster, and then not just old AWA guys. You turn on the TV, Roddy Piper's going to make you want to buy a ticket. So that's tough to kind of push back on. But having the Crusher and Baron von Raschke as tag team champions, I don't know what to say.
They had opportunities to do things differently. They could have, kept Jim Brunzell. They could have, had other talent come in. One of the biggest mistakes that they as far as what they could have done, Randy Savage was a free agent that anybody could have signed. He could have come in 84 and 85. He could have been the AWA champion. He was, for those that knew in wrestling, he was like the greatest kind of free agent that was out there. But maybe because he worked Outlaw Promotions at one point, or he was just, wrestling in smaller areas, maybe. But Verne even worked with Memphis. He had relationships with Memphis. He should have known that this Randy Savage was out there. But I saw a shoot that was very telling with Colonel De Beers in recent years, where he talked about the mentality of Verne and Greg, and he basically said something to the effect of that Verne and Greg kind of felt like, well, if so-and-so is bigger than we are, and say if Hulk Hogan is bigger than we are the fans going to forget about us? And I kind of think that was one of the things that, was the downfall of the AWA. They may have been more concerned about being over and being legends of their territory than letting the next guy come along and do big business.
Another thing too, if you're Verne Gagne, you've done great business for all of those years. Why are you reinventing the wheel, not realizing that the wheel has already been invented by the guy from Connecticut?
Right. Yeah, it's it just the changing of the times. Wrestling was getting more outlandish, crazy angles, and really over the top characters. The AWA had a lot of that, But when they lost Hogan and eventually lost Mean Gene and lost Jesse the Body, they were just left with some good talent. I mean, they had the Fabulous Ones. They had other young wrestlers, Rick Martel as champion, but they just couldn't compete with New York because the roster was humongous by that time.
And if you're Verne Gagne, too, you might say to yourself, hey, Hulk Hogan was here for like 2 years and 3 months. We've been here a lot longer. We were fine before we had him. We'll be fine after he leaves. Again, not really realizing that the game was changing. But with that, let's hear from Greg Gagne and Jim Brunzell.
High Flyers in action. Greg Gagne, Jim Brunzell. I'm going to give them a second to catch their breath. Before they head to the locker room, we do want to talk to them. A couple of single matches I want to point out. It will be Mad Dog Vachon facing Jerry Blackwell here in town. On the next card, Brad Ringens to go against Golden Greek John Tolos. And as you know, Rick Martel to meet the Sheik. Gentlemen, please, come on in. You've heard from Bobby Heenan, Ken Patera, Jesse the Body Ventura. They are already, Greg Gagne, proclaiming victory for themselves.
You know, Gene, we've been very busy this year, and it's been unfortunate. We haven't had a chance to get up to the Eagles Club in Aspen, Colorado, because some of the great wrestling fans in all the world are up there. And all through Colorado, and they've been behind the High Flyers, and we appreciate the fact that they've supported us in the past. But how a team like Patera and Ventura deserve a title match is beyond us. First of all, they've never wrestled as a team. Who have they beat?
Well, good point. Good point. They are a newly formed alliance.
What gives them the right to go after the World's Tag Team title? I'll tell you what. Bobby the Weasel Heenan, that's who did it. Because Bobby Duncombe got hurt. He put pressure on Stanley Blackburn. He had us fined for our actions in the ring with Patera and Duncombe. Had us reprimanded by the AWA. And they said we have to step in the ring with Patera and Ventura. Well, if they think they're going to come in and steamroll over us, they're out of their mind, because they're going to have to earn this championship, and they're going to have to beat us to do that.
You know, Jimmy Brunzell, Jesse Ventura, quick to point out that in his mind and the mind of Adrian Adonis, you and Greg stole the championship belts from them a couple of years ago.
That's what you call it, being a poor loser, Gene.
Sour grapes,
let's look at Jesse Ventura and look at Ken Patera. Two big men, two big athletes. Put them together, like Greg said, who have they ever beaten? They're very, very fortunate to get this championship match, and Greg and I, under no way are we going in this match underestimating anybody, and especially when Bobby Heenan's in their corner.
I thank you very much, High Flyers, current tag team champions of the world, Greg Gagne, Jim Brunzell. For the Mile High City, there's going to be more exciting action.
Okay, once again, anytime we use audio like that on here on Stick to Wrestling, it's for review purposes only. Steve, I put that audio together like 2-3 months ago, so it's like, I kind of forgot about it. Where do I start? First of all, John Tolos in 1983. Yeah. But secondly, I mean, Greg Gagne, Jim Brunzell, look, they were an excellent, excellent tag team. I've been told by AWA fans that they were the Rock and Roll Express before the Rock and Roll Express. But rule number one, I don't know how that ever got on, especially the Greg Gagne part. I don't know how that got on TV. Number one rule, if you're a babyface, don't whine. Don't whine if you're a babyface. Don't say, oh, I don't know how these guys got a title shot. Nah, you say, hey, I'll take on anybody. I don't care.
No, I hear exactly what you're talking about. That was so kind of an offensive interview, if anything else. I think usually in pro wrestling, the idea of an interview, you put over your opponents to make it seem like a real worthwhile match that you'd pay money to see. And Brunzell did a lot of that on the back end, just trying to save Gagne's face.
Sounded
there.
like it.
But yeah, he was trying to do some reconnaissance there. But yeah, I mean, it just... why would he be talking that way? Because, I mean, these guys were two major stars. Patera had been a really well-known AWA star, and Ventura had just been, came off the East-West connection from a couple years earlier. So they were both well-regarded guys. I mean, it's okay to say, hey, these guys have never teamed together, and they probably won't know how to work with each other because they've never teamed, but we know that they are both good. Yeah, I thought it was really a screwy interview. Actually.
No, I mean, you can say something like, "Hey, they've never teamed before, so that means we have the edge when it comes to experience, but they have the edge where they can watch all kinds of film on us. We have no idea what these guys are going to do, but whatever they're going to do, we're going to be ready for it. We're going to fight our hardest."
You mentioned earlier that the High Flyers had a lot of people thought so highly of them. I remember hearing Larry Matisic on an old shoot interview was talking about how he thought of them after seeing them wrestle in St. Louis, and apparently they had a really good match that was super hot. It really was the highlight of a major show in St. Louis, which was still a major NWA city at the time, and it just made me think that the career trajectory of the High Flyers and eventually both of their careers, I think they would have been better served if they had kind of been like a regular tag team act, like a lot of the other tag teams that are well known, like say the Valiants or the Blackjacks or whoever. If they had just kind of traveled around to the different circuits rather than homesteading in the AWA, because no matter how good they were in the AWA, I think after a while, people just took them for granted. Like, this is kind of like the home team, or this is Verne's son and his partner. I don't think they gave them enough credit after a while. Had they gone out and had all these different successes in other areas and then came back, I think that would have been a more effective career arc for them.
It would have been, and that was another one of your good points that you brought up to me before the show. I guess it depends on what they wanted to do. It sounded like, my guess is Greg Gagne was fine doing what he was doing. He was making a lot of money. He, was working for his dad. He probably had duties outside of just, making the towns. But that's a really good point that you made, that if Gagne and Brunzell really wanted to be that tag team, they could have done a run in the Carolinas or Georgia and Florida, freshen themselves up a little bit for the AWA audience, and then made the big return.
I think the reason that that idea resonated with me was I was kind of looking at the WWF guys. I mean, the WWF, had Bruno back on as champion, and then you had some guys who were homesteaders, like you had your Putski or maybe even Strongbow, but they always kept the tag teams always mixed up. They'd always have a new babyface team, a brand new team, a new heel team, and then they just keep swapping them out every few months or so. And they kept it fresh, and it kind of kept it interesting. Here in the AWA, I mean, I think the High Flyers were born sometime in the mid-'70s. They started really feuding for the titles, or I think around '76, and it became Blackjack Lanza and Bobby Duncombe were their main foes, and then they switched it up to Adonis and Ventura, and there were other teams involved, Patera and Blackwell, Patera and Duncombe. I mean, they had other teams, but it was always the High Flyers, and I think that probably over time, fans were getting tired of the High Flyers just because they were always there.
Yeah, they started, I believe, in 1974 and were together until Brunzell left 10 years later. Now, Brunzell had a run in the Mid-Atlantic area, but, I mean, it was pretty quick, and it was, when I say quick, 7 or 8 months. And when Gagne and Brunzell finally won the tag team titles, I want to say beginning of 1977, it really did feel like, okay, the hometown guys won, but that gets old after a while. And like you pointed out, the WWF had homesteaders like Ivan Putski, except he would disappear for a couple of years and then come back. Strongbow did the same thing. He left in 79, didn't come back until 82. Like the AWA guys just stuck around.
Yeah, I think in the long run, that was probably a major difference. And you have to give a lot of the credit to the elder Vince McMahon. I mean, we talk about all these other promoters, the Bill Watts and Eddie Graham and Roy Shires, all these great promoters. They're all great, but Vince was the only one that we know of that had this humongous book, this big planner, and he was planning Madison Square Garden for like 12 months from now, and he really knew how to get everything in motion, just like his son does now, to whether it's the Garden in 12 months or WrestleMania next year. He knew how to put all those levers in motion and do the right thing. Verne was a good promoter, an excellent promoter, but I think as far as thinking forward into the future and this planning and setting these big rivalries in motion, I don't think he was really up to the challenge in that regard.
No, I mean, he was not prepared at all to take on Vince McMahon. I mean, and again, I'm giving Verne credit for everything that he did. He promoted really successfully for over 20 years, I think. But the world changed, and, as someone who, believe me, I get it. The world changes, and sometimes it leaves people. I'm about Verne's age when Verne started losing his grip on the AWA, so I totally get that. But with that, let's hear from Mad Dog Vachon.
I mentioned the singles match, Jerry Blackwell to meet Mad Dog Vachon. Make no mistake about it, ladies and gentlemen, this will not be a battle. It, in fact, will be a war. Maurice Vachon, please come on in if you would. Jerry Blackwell.
Mad Dog is the name, if you don't mind. I left Maurice back home a long time ago. There's no place in professional wrestling, not when I get in the ring, for anybody else but a Mad Dog. Jerry Blackwell, you made me a Mad Dog. It's people like you that turned me from a Maurice to a Mad Dog. You made me what I am today, what I'm going to be in the ring when I get with you, you fat slob.
Well,
You put me out of wrestling for over 2 years. But you know something, Fatwell? You can never do it alone. But this time, you're gonna be alone. Alone with a Mad Dog. I told you I would get you one way or the other. When you're looking over your shoulder, there'll be a Mad Dog on your tracks. Now I've got you cornered like a rat. You're nothing else but. And also a big yellow fat one. But you know something? This time, you will have nobody to turn to tag when the altitude a mile high. When you're out of steam, I'll chew on your bones. I'll bite you. I'll break more of your bone. I'll crush you. It's gonna be a tough fight, so you better come out fighting. You better come out fighting.
I like that. People like you turn me from Maurice into Mad Dog. Steve, we were talking about the AWA not really doing a lot of long-term planning, but one thing they did plan long-term is Crusher Blackwell's babyface turn. Like everything with Adnan was supposed to be leading up to that. And because Patera defected to the WWF and everything else happened, and Blackwell ran into health issues as well. It didn't turn into anywhere near as big a deal as they thought it was going to be. But Crusher Blackwell was going to get a huge babyface push, maybe even an AWA championship, if you can believe that.
Yeah, he was a very sympathetic fan favorite when that time came for him to become one. I mean, he was very soft spoken, and you did kind of feel empathy for him for all that other heels had put him through. And I think at the time he was primarily feuding with Brody at the time that they kind of switched him over. Yeah, it was interesting with him. And I think you mentioned on a prior show he was going to switch to the WWF and got to one of the TV tapings and basically fell asleep and then went home after that.
That is correct. I remember them saying on TNT that next week Crusher Blackwell is going to be with us. I was like, oh, wow, another AWA guy. And I was left wondering for about 3 years what happened. And then I heard that story. He showed up at a taping. He decided it was too much sitting around doing interviews, and he just got up and left.
Yeah, well, good for him. And about the Mad Dog Vachon interview, I think you can kind of look at it, one of a couple of different ways. If you're just like an average person, just like flipping channels, maybe you don't even know anything about wrestling, and you come upon this guy, going crazy. I think he's like the perfect, or that interview is the perfect like stereotype of what professional wrestling was to the average non-fan or person that didn't like wrestling. Here's a guy that looks like 110 years old, talking really strangely and in a really weird manner about this opponent that we don't know. But in another way, I mean, the interview was quite effective too. I mean, if you're a wrestling fan and you can understand what he's getting at, I mean, he did a very good job in the interview, and and that was a hot angle at the time as far as him trying to put Blackwell into a coffin, or I think it was a coffin match type thing coming up.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Typical person who's not a wrestling fan is going to look at Mad Dog Vachon, this rather strange-looking man who's, past middle age at that point. He's missing some teeth, and, he's out there screaming about what he's going to do to the guy. But, I mean, hey, that's how wrestling works. And once again, let's hear some audio. Sheik Adnan El-Kaisi and the guy we just talked about, Jerry Blackwell.
Some time back, Martel has not forgotten it. He has made his feelings and his intentions quite known.
Well, that's going to be the part of your life, Mr. Ricky Martel, because when you step in the ring with His Highness Sheik Adnan El-Kaisi, you are stepping with the real man. When you finish your match with me, you are graduating with your PhD of wrestling. We should not be wrestling alone in a single matches. His Highness and myself, we should be wrestling in a tag match all the time. But Your Highness, my heart is with you. Whether it is in a single match or a tag match, we always together.
All right, Jerry Blackwell, you, my friend, are going to have to deal with the likes of Mad Dog Vachon. Not Maurice Vachon, Mad Dog Vachon.
Let me tell you, Stanley Blackburn, you've split us up. And you're trying to prevent us from going for the world titles. And not only did you split us up and try to keep us from doing that, you forced me to get in the ring with Mad Dog Vachon, the man that broke my hand, the man that broke this man's arm. And he's standing out here talking about throwing the rule book out the window. Well, let me tell you right now, I want two officials. Stanley Blackburn, I want you sitting at ringside. I want you to see what kind of a maniac you forced me to get in the ring with. That's right. And when I say force, that's what I mean. Because I don't want to get in the ring with Mad Dog Vachon. Because when you call him a mad dog, that's exactly what he is. And I want you to sit right there at ringside. I want you to see exactly what that man does.
Thank you.
I want you to know what kind of a wrestler he is.
Both of these.
Because he's nothing but a mad dog. He wants to do anything he can do to me.
Matches. Take a
Okay, we were just talking about pro wrestling cliches with Mad Dog Vachon. How about the guy dressed up as a sheik screaming into the camera, and the other guy who clearly is from Georgia or someplace like it, also dressed as a sheik and screaming at the camera?
Yeah, the Sheik Adnan, I always thought was just such a kind of a rip-off gimmick. Even at the time, I thought was so bad in every way. I mean, he wasn't the Sheik Ed Farhad. He wasn't the Iron Sheik. He was the Sheik Adnan El-Kaisi. I mean, he could wrestle. He was a wrestler back in the day. We know him as Billy White Wolf from the WWF. But I never cared for him. I thought he was a really overblown, overrated manager. But apparently he's a nice guy in real life from what I've heard, so kudos to him.
No, I agree with everything you said. I thought he was a terrible manager, but I mean, I've heard he's a really good guy in real life, and someday I will read his book. We were just talking about Crusher Blackwell in the WWF in 1984. He makes it to a taping and doesn't even make last the entire taping. He walks out. Something happened with Crusher Blackwell in the WWF in 1978. He had been there in 1976, kind of a mid-card guy. Then they brought him back in 1978, managed by the Grand Wizard of Wrestling. It looked like he was going to get a big push, and all of a sudden, it just died. I have no idea what happened. But, Steve, I'm sure you remember that.
In the WWF, he was on TV most weeks. But one thing you might remember, John, he had like a one-off title match at the Spectrum with Backlund. Do you remember anything about that?
With Backlund, no. I don't remember. I don't even know about that. I don't think he got any matches against Sammartino in 76 either, but I had no idea they wrestled at the Spectrum.
Yeah, it was actually just one match. I think it was in 78. Backlund beat him in a one-off match. I'm assuming that he just got him up in the atomic drop and pinned him that way, but that's one I've never seen. But it might be out there.
I mean, I kind of doubt it. I mean, that was way back before a whole lot of stuff was being recorded. But anyway, I'll tell you what. Let's hear from Brad Rengans and again from Crusher Jerry Blackwell.
Rengans, I sit here viewing the monitor, seeing the replay of that incident from late last year. I see the grimacing on your face. I see the contortions. And I can't blame you one bit. Granted, scars on the ankle as a direct result of the actions and tactics of the Sheik and Jerry Blackwell, but I'm certain more important, the scars inside here.
Well, Gene, every time I look at that tape, I have one thing in mind, and that's revenge. And Blackwell, it's just going to be you and I in the ring, nobody else. And you're going to wish you never did that, what you did to me. Because when I come into that ring, Fatwell, it's going to be you and I, and I'm going to do just one thing. I'm going to knock your head off.
Usually a very quiet, modest young man, tremendously intense there. Jerry Blackwell, you heard what
Let me tell you something before I get started on this. What an injustice when we wrestled Greg Gagne and Jim Brunzell. I cannot believe it. What are we going to have to do in order to get the world titles?
You probably can't.
And then another thing, I'm hot at you too. Why are you showing that on nationwide TV here again? There's no reason to show that whatsoever. The only thing it shows is what a fair person I am. This man comes sticking his nose in my business. He gets his foot hurt, and then he blames me on it. Well, let me tell you something, Brad Ringans. You come in that ring, and you knock my head off if you can. You suplex me if you can. You hurt me if you can. And you beat me if you can. Which I don't think you can. But there's one thing for sure. You're liable to walk away from there and need some more surgery on that ankle. You're liable to go to the hospital and never wrestle again, boy, and I'm going to enjoy it.
All right, Sheik Adnan El Casey, and please don't shout, Sheik. Please don't shout.
This is the way I speak to my harem.
You have got
And
Rick
this is the way.
Please. You've got Rick Martel. Let's set the record straight.
Rick Martel, in the name of his wisdom, you got a match of your life. You have to fight an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Because I want to do anything possible to put you out. Because, Your Highness, now let's have Jeannie do some dancing for us.
Well, it's
and give us some
Exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to split us up. They're trying to put us in single matches. And Ricky Martel, this man is going to go in there and destroy you. He's going to show you what he's made of. And I'm going to be sitting in his corner. Don't you worry about looking over there. I know there's 20 or 30 more. That's going to excite you.
Watch your action.
Steve, sometimes as we record, I come up with ideas for the title of the show. And maybe 10, 15 minutes ago, the working title was Babyfaces Don't Whine, right? But now I've got two alternatives. Please Don't Shout. But right now, the number one is the scars on Brad's heart.
Those interviews were really hard to get through. On the positive side, I kind of see Jerry Blackwell as a little bit like Kevin Owens today on WWE, somebody that puts out some great matches and it maybe gets beat down a lot, and but the fans just kind of gain respect for them over time. And just like them. And I think the fans in the AWA looked at Jerry Blackwell as a survivor. You know, he might lose a lot of matches, he may get beat down, but he's always comes back for more. And I think they respected him. But that Brad Rangan's interview is one of the really worst I've heard in a long time.
I mean, Brad, the AWA really is the only promotion that was going to feature a guy like Brad Rangan's. And every promoter and every promotion has its own personality, and that was one of Verne's. I mean, I remember reading, 40 years ago, more than that, 42 years ago, reading about Brad Rangan's in the magazines and being like, man, this guy, if he doesn't make it in the AWA, he's not going to make it anywhere.
And surprisingly, Vince signed him. Vince brought him in I think, 87. Mm-hmm. He just worked prelims, never did maybe work some TV matches, but, he was just probably a good guy to be around to maybe show some of the younger guys some wrestling moves, but definitely not your professional type wrestler. But just thinking about him a little bit more, when the AWA really got in rough area there, him and Ken Patera won their tag team titles, I think, in '89.
Yeah, I remember that.
When the promotion was on fumes, and they were called the Olympians. But it was really just a terrible time for the AWA by then.
It was not good. Like I said, Brad Rangan's, I could not see him being pushed anywhere except for the AWA. And you're right, he didn't get pushed in the WWF. He was just another guy. Next up, the legendary Nick Bockwinkel. Let's hear from him.
Just seen Golden Greek. John told us in action. Nick Bockwinkel, I want to bring you in. Even though former Denver Bronco Wahoo McDaniel resides in western Texas, Denver is like a hometown to this man. He played professional football here. He's got a lot of good friends. You'd have to say, yes, he is the hometown favorite. He happens to be challenging you for this little baby, which happens to be the world title.
Isn't it amazing? He's from Texas. Stanley Blackburn's from Texas. He played football here, hometown favorite. 2 weeks, unprecedented. We were informed before the last match that the winner of would have to face Wahoo McDaniels. Now, if you aren't trying to tell me that they want to knock myself and Mr. Heenan off the top of the hill, then what else is going on?
It's a matter of interpretation.
Oh, isn't it? Yes, it is. And we're interpreting it the way it really probably is. Wahoo McDaniels, I know one thing. You're going to come in there and you're going to fight and scratch and dig and claw. You did it when you played football, and that's the reputation you've had in all the time that you've wrestled. You are a man who will fight to the last breath. And I have to admire you for that. But I want you to know something. I have not been the heavyweight champion of the world for all these years simply because I don't care or I take and have an insouciant attitude. Not at all. I care very highly, and I will dig and claw and scratch and dig. And every bit of sweat I've got and every ounce of blood that I can muster up to pump through my body is what I'm going to put into that match, because I do not want to come out of the ring as the uncrowned champion.
You know, Wahoo thinks this is going to work to his advantage. Nick will not be prepared in 2 weeks. He won't be ready for this. That is where you've made your big mistake, Papoose Face. You're going to be the one on the short end of that stick. You're going to be the one when that bell rings. What is this? What is this Nick Bockwinkel doing? He's in the best shape I've ever seen in my life. That's exactly what's going to happen.
We're out of time.
Okay, and again, anytime we use audio like that on Stick to Wrestling, it is for review purposes only. Nick Bockwinkel, has been a story out there since the 80s about Nick Bockwinkel that I'd like to address here. Nick Bockwinkel, the story was offered a run with the NWA title in 1979. That story it's not true. It's sort of true in a way. Well, let me explain. Paul Bosch, the Houston promoter, was always very high on Nick Bockwinkel, and it's pretty well known he didn't like Harley Race very much. And Paul Bosch said to Nick Bockwinkel in 1979, would you like me to put your name in for a run with the NWA title? And Bockwinkel thought it over, and he said, no, I'm happy doing what I'm doing. The NWA title, the NWA champion made a little bit more money, but the lifestyle that Bockwinkel had was just way better than the NWA champion's lifestyle. So that's the story. He wasn't offered the NWA title. He was offered to have it suggested that maybe, put it up for vote, and Nick said no. Steve, any thoughts on Nick Bockwinkel?
Well, to your point that you just said, I think, from what I heard on that story, basically, Nick looked at the paperwork and did the math in his head. Of course, he was a brilliant guy, and he figured out that, I'm making almost as much as the NWA champion now. I don't know what the figures were. Maybe he was making 10 or 20,000 less. But he was having a lot fewer dates than the NWA champion was. I say if the NWA champion was working 330 days or maybe 300 days a year, he was working like maybe 250, maybe something like that, and he had a lot more time to himself, was making almost as much, and like you said, he had a great relationship with Paul Bosch. He ended up buying into that promotion, and I think Bockwinkel maybe even had points in other promotions too. He was really a very intelligent guy. But while we've been talking about all this, one thing that came to my mind was, this is 1983, and you're talking about Wahoo versus Bockwinkel and these legendary wrestlers of the 70s. 70s, really. The thing that came to my mind is if you're looking at sports in general from that era, you think about guys like Ricky Henderson and Tim Raines, and in football, Jerry Rice and say John Elway. These players who are very young and youthful, and you look at Hogan. I mean, Hogan kind of fit into that. Like, this guy is the kind of the leader of the future of our sport, and I kind of think this is why the AWA ultimately kind of fell by the wayside. I think as a fan at home, when you see Randy Savage against Hulk Hogan or Paul Orndorff, you get caught up into it. And you think, God, this is the ultimate in wrestling. The same with Ric Flair against, say, Ricky Steamboat. You really can really suspend disbelief. But when you're watching, Bockwinkel and say Wahoo. I mean, Bockwinkel was as good as anybody right up to the very end, but he did look older. He looked like an older pro wrestler, and I think the fans just wanted to see younger people. That's all I want to say.
Well, I'll tell you what, Steve. I've told this story on Stick to Wrestling. I think I've told it before, but I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago, so I can blow the dust off it and tell it again. Paulie Dangerously told me in front of a bunch of people that he had a meeting. He was doing an interview, right? And he was managing Dennis Condrey and Randy Rose in 1987. And he's talking about, what's going to happen when they win the tag team titles. Well, I'm going to have a big party back in New Jersey, and I'm going to invite all of my friends. I'm going to invite Bruce Springsteen. I'm going to invite John Bon Jovi. And Verne's like, cut. Don't talk about your friends on TV. And Paul's trying to explain, no, these are big New Jersey celebrities. And Verne's like, oh, well, if you want to talk about someone people will know from New Jersey, talk about Jerry Vale. And that, you know what? I'm not even knocking the guy because, like I said, I'm getting older. I don't know who's in the top 20 musically. I don't know what is popular on television. So I get that time was leaving Verne behind, probably at a greater pace than most people.
Yeah, but he was in the entertainment business. I mean, even as the years would go on ESPN, they ended up having this little kind of entertainment segment on the AWA show where he'd have since they were doing the shows from Vegas, he had Don Rickles come on. I think he had Jerry Lewis one time, and he was really stuck in the past. I mean, he had these aging stars on instead of having somebody who was hip and young and the fans were into. So.
I do remember watching one of those segments, and I remember Verne Gagne going out there trying to exchange barbs with Don Rickles, and it did not work out particularly well for Verne. But with that said, let's hear from Hulk Hogan, Baron von Raschke, and Mad Dog Vachon.
To meet this trio, Baron von Raschke, the incredible Hulk Hogan, and the man in the forefront right now, the very dangerous and volatile Mad Dog Vachon.
Well, this is a declaration of war. Everybody can see that. We have our army on this side, and I pity, yes, I feel sorry for our opponents, because this is the war of the war of the world, because we gonna destroy everybody. Or can I help it? I have 2 Sherman tanks on each side of me.
Baron von Raschke.
Das ist richtig. The Visa family all together in the ring at the same time. Dog, Hulkamania and the Baron. That is all the people need to know. Something that's already started. There's a whole lot of shaking going on. And it's not our team. They're half scared to death already. They know that by ourselves, we're all human destruction machines. But when we're all together, we're just like one flew over the cuckoo's nest. We're stark raving maniacs. Anytime we see the other one go crazy, it makes just one of the others go even nuttier. And you know something? I pity them. I really do, because this is going to be it for them. I can't imagine anything worse than this. This is a fate worse than death to get in the ring with.
Okay, and again, anytime we use audio like that on Stick to Wrestling, it is for review purposes only. Steve, Vince McMahon had to be, if he saw AWA TV, which I'm sure he did, in 1983, he had to be looking at Hulk Hogan and salivating.
Yeah, and he almost said the Mr. T catchphrase there. I pity the fool. He left out fool, but he says I pity them. So yeah, he was, and that was of course '83 was the year of the debut of A-Team, I believe, and that's when Mr. T started to get really really big. I'll give you a quick Mad Dog Vachon story here. I was working for a company here in Tampa, and I met this nice lady who's probably about like a dozen years older than I was. So she was a little bit older than me, and really nice lady. And we worked together, and over the days we discussed that I was a wrestling fan, and the minute that she realized that, she said, "Oh, wrestling, oh, okay." And she said that she used to rent a property in Omaha. She used to rent a property to the Vachon brothers. And I'm thinking to myself, okay. And then she says to me, the Vachon brothers, they were such losers. and I'm thinking to myself, I read every wrestling magazine. This is wrestling royalty. How could she be saying this? But now as the years have gone on, and I didn't really push her on why are they losers? But as the years have gone on, I can only imagine that they probably kayfabed her at everything, there's no water coming out of the sink. What do we do? And it must have been a miserable experience renting to them. That's all I can say.
You know what? The more I think about it, I can see that. Sometimes these guys just can't stop fabing. Anyway, before we get to the next interview, Steve, now you've got me desperately wanting to check out some Don Rickles back when he was on Johnny Carson. He was funny, man. I haven't seen him in so long.
Yeah, even CPO Sharkey wasn't that bad in retrospect.
All right. With that, let's hear from future AWA champion Rick Martel.
Some exciting news as the fans heard. A big disappointment in not being the world's heavyweight champ in that match with Nick Bockwinkel. You held Bobby Heenan responsible, and now you've asked for him. The promoters have signed it.
It's a very big disappointment, but finally I have my match against Bobby Heenan. Do you realize, Gene, what he did to me? He cost me the World's Championship. I had Nick Bockwinkel where I wanted him. And on top of that, when I did hit the rope, he pulled the top rope down. There's no telling how I would have landed on that floor. My wrestling career could have been over. Bobby Heenan, you cost me the World's Championship. Mais me garantir une chose, tu vas me payer pour ça, toi. Tu vas être fini, je vais y tirer un bras, je vais te battre avec le bras qui saigne. Je vais tout te faire. And I guarantee you one thing, Gene. When I'm through with him, he's not going to interfere in my matches again, or anybody else's for that matter.
I thank you, Rick Martel. A special hello to a good friend of mine up in Evergreen, Colorado, the western suburbs.
So much for not talking about your friends on TV. Steve, Rick Martel was a year away from winning the AWA championship. He won it from Jumbo Tsuruta. Did you see that coming? I totally did not.
No, I mean, when I thought about Rick Martel, I guess because I was in the WWF area living there, I thought of him as a tag team wrestler, not really a singles wrestler. And, he even teamed up with future Strike Force member Tito Santana in the AWA. So I didn't really think of him as a single star, but when I, saw him on the cover of PWI years later, I guess in '84, he definitely had a championship look to him. I mean, he had a great look, and he only was champion for close to a year. It was just I think he was a good champion. And as far as the challengers they had for him, they did have some good challengers, probably more from a wrestling standpoint, like Mr. Saito and Jimmy Garvin, different people, more from a wrestling than a box office. I don't think he was like popping the houses that much, but he was putting on a good show, and then he, after this, I think he went back to Montreal for a while, worked in Montreal, and then eventually got the call to come to Connecticut and work with Can-Am Connection for a while. So.
Yeah, Rick Martel was an outstanding in-ring performer. He's a really good-looking guy. Interviews, not so much. I think a lot of it, like a lot of people say, the AWA really went downhill with Rick Martel as champion. I think they didn't really use him properly as champion. I always thought they should have looked at what the WWF did with Bob Backlund and just start rotating challengers in for him, especially big guys, for him to go out and conquer. And instead of, having these quote unquote scientific matches with Billy Robinson or obviously you have to have the series with Nick Bockwinkel, but you can't have it go on forever.
Yeah. The AWA was always, because of Verne and his amateur background, it was always wrestling first and anything else second. And ultimately, that was the cause of the demise of the AWA, I believe, because wrestling went from being the focus of the show, of any wrestling show, to kind of becoming the secondary thing, whether it was the interviews, the music, just the feuds. Wrestling, it's the actual wrestling itself became secondary as we got into the mid to late 80s.
I mean, you brought up a good point about Verne Gagne. I mean, Verne wanted guys to have that amateur background that Verne Gagne had. Vince McMahon was a bodybuilder. Who did he build around? Bodybuilders. Bill Watts, former football player. Who did Bill Watts like to push? Big guys who used to play football.
Right. Yeah. He really liked tough guys, and when he brought in somebody, when he had a Bill Dundee there to give him some other ideas, like he realized Bill Watts did that. Hey, we need to see some female fans come to the show, so let's get some Rock and Roll Express type wrestlers come in. So these promoters really needed to think more instead of just what they like and what they want. Try to think about what will bring in a big audience of a diverse crowd to enjoy the show.
I mean, not to talk about an unrelated thing, a thing unrelated to the AWA, but I mean, I remember the Rock and Roll Express when they made their debut in Mid-South Wrestling. They had been on TV before in videos, but they had not been to the arena before. And this is viewable, by the way, on Peacock. This is like the very end of 1983. They show up in Shreveport at the Irish McNeil Boys Club. And they'd never been there before, and the place exploded. They loved the Rock and Roll Express. So Bill Watts saw something that obviously Jerry Jarrett didn't.
Yeah, I mean, wrestling, the audience, I mean, there has to be a little bit of something different for everybody. I think Eddie Graham described wrestling as kind of like a wrestling card would be kind of like a smorgasbord. You have to have your comedy match, your scientific opening match, your a little bit of everything. I mean, if you look at WrestleMania 3, it has all that. It has some good wrestling. It has the comedy match with Bundy and Hillbilly Jim and the Midgets. It has this good wrestling with Savage and Steamboat, and then the epic encounter with Andre and Hogan. So not every card has to be WrestleMania 3, but if you have a card that offers you a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and kind of covers all the bases, you should be in business for quite some time.
No, I agree with you. I mean, one common complaint about today's wrestling in 2023 is that everybody looks the same and everyone does the same stuff. And you're right. I mean, there was a lot of diversity in pro wrestling in the late 70s, early 80s. And, we just got to the point with the AWA that, the lack of young talent really brought them down. With that, let's hear some more audio. We've got Sergeant Jacques Goulet, Mad Dog Vachon, and Verne Gagne.
Action in just a moment. Sergeant Jacques Goulet, I wanted to bring you in. King Jerry Lawler out of Memphis, Tennessee, the man you're going to be facing here on the next big upcoming card.
Jerry Lawler, the king. Who is the king? I'm going to tell you one thing. When I was in a...
Gee, what in the world? Mad Dog Vachon?
This is more important. The announcement I have to make is more important. I finally convinced him, Verne Gagne. Come here, Verne Gagne. I finally convinced him that Verne is the most important announcement of the century in wrestling. Verne Gagne accepted to be my partner.
You have got to be kidding me.
That's right, Verne Gagne.
You are... Can I get Verne Gagne? My word, come on in here. Is it true what this man says?
Yes, Gene, I tell you, I've never been under such pressure. In the last 15 minutes, I've been as much pressure all my life than I have this. I've been like in a boiler and a cooker. With this man on my back and pulling out my tie, my body,
is my partner.
He pointed out to me all the things that have happened over the years here with these two people, Blackwell and Sheik, with the Greg situation and Brunzell, and what kind of a man I was. What kind of a father was I? Am I gutless? Am I this? Am I yellow? And I just can't stand it. So,
Yes, I have consented to be the Mad Dog's partner against Blackwell and Sheik, and that's it, baby.
What about Goulet? He just got floored here by Mad Dog Vachon. Talk about news, ladies and gentlemen. What a bombshell. Mad Dog Vachon getting Verne Gagne to team up with him to go against the Sheik and Jerry Blackwell. How?
Okay, obviously you can't see it, but what happened was Rene Goulet was doing, or Sergeant Jacques Goulet was doing his interview, and Mad Dog Vachon just comes out and knocks him on his keister and evicts him. I always thought, Steve, that pro wrestling, it requires a little bit of bullying like that. I don't think there was one fan out there who was like, oh, Mad Dog, you shouldn't have done that. He was just talking. They're like, yeah, Mad Dog, get him.
Well, I'll say this. Here's a new candidate for title of the episode. Mad Dog Vachon is a spaz.
Kind of is.
He on this, again, you can't see the video of this, so maybe you can look it up on YouTube. But he when he talks about being partners with Verne Gagne, he's like, jumping up and down like a little schoolgirl. And when I'm watching him on this, he reminds me of kind of like the AWA's answer to George Steele, I guess. Just this, wild, uncontrollable individual. Mad Dog had actual amateur wrestling training and was a legitimate shooter, I guess. George Steele, not so much, but he was really a tough guy, and nobody would mess with him. But they were both really oddball wrestling characters from left field.
They certainly were. I don't know the whole story behind what brought Verne Gagne out of retirement to take on Sheik Adnan El-Kaisi and Crusher Blackwell. But in my opinion, if you're going to do that, and clearly Verne came out of retirement a bunch of times, you've got to have a bigger storyline than that. It's got to be this, like, maybe once every 18 months, Verne Gagne comes out of retirement, and it always has to be for something big, in my opinion.
Well, if you notice Verne's little promo that he cut right at the end of it, he says, like, I'll be right there, baby. And it sounds like something he took out of the Bill After magazine, like, something out of one of those interviews. But I think he had to prove he was young and hip by saying baby in the clip there.
He certainly proved it all right. Okay, let's hear from a little-known wrestler named Hulk Hogan back in 1983 when he was still with the AWA.
Ventura, the native of Venice Beach, California, big man, popular indeed. Good reason for your wanting the native of San Diego, Jesse Ventura.
You know something? The intensity of the whole thing made the AWA open its eyes and realize the only way to get this thing said and done was to put the Hulkster and Mr. Jesse Ventura in a one-on-one situation. You know something? It goes way, way back to when the Hulkster was hurt. And then I came back and declared war on the Bobby Heenan family and Mr. Jesse Ventura. Ventura, you were the instigator of the whole thing because you stood for everything that I hate. The Hulkster was on a roll. I had the world's heavyweight title within my grasp.
Very close.
And I was climbing to the top of the ladder. And Mr. Ventura, you instigated this premeditated assault. And now you are the one that got yourself in this position. After the last time out, you forced this thing upon yourself, and now I hope you're ready for justice's due.
You know, Hulk, I'm going to point out at this time that I have watched and followed the career of Jesse Ventura very, very closely over the past 3 or 4 years. His association with Adrian Adonis, World Tag Team Champion, no doubt about it. The fans really feel that Ventura should pay for the injury to that big arm of yours.
And the thing is, nothing even compares to what's going down now. Mr. Ventura, Hulkamania is still running wild no matter what you did. You are mine in a one-on-one situation, and now you're going to have to face me in the center of the ring by yourself in a single match. Mr. Ventura, there's a long list of people that I owe because I'm going right back to the top of the ladder. And, Body, it's you and me. Good against evil. Hulkster versus Mr. V. I hope you're ready because Hulkamania is in the largest arms in the world. The 24-inch pythons are ready for you. I'm going to squeeze every bit of breath out of your body.
Ladies and gentlemen, the very popular big man, the incredible Hulk Hogan and Mr. V, Jesse the Body Ventura. This is what this man wants. And according to promoters...
Steve, couple of things. In 1984, I saw Hulk Hogan versus Jesse the Body Ventura at a little ice arena in Manchester, New Hampshire. And this was before both of them became absolutely household names. Just, but it's something I look back on and say, wow, I get to see these two in this tiny little venue. But and here's something we've talked about before, Steve. Gene Okerlund in the WWF. I mean, if I were Vince McMahon, I was watching this, I'd be like, look, I want this Hulk Hogan guy, this Gene Okerlund guy, I have no interest in. But not Vince. He says, you know what? I want this Gene Okerlund guy if he can turn up the volume a little bit more.
and he would certainly do that, and Hulk would turn it up more too. I think everybody turned it up a lot more when you think about it. But and let me ask you about the Ice Show. I mean, how was that experience? Like, how was that match?
I don't remember much about the match at all. I mean, everyone went home happy because Hogan got the 1, 2, 3. The Freebirds were there on that night too. It was crazy.
That is crazy. Gosh.
All right. I'll tell you what. Let's hear from Blackjack Lanza and Bobby the Brain Heenan.
And Blackjack Lanza, you are going to be part of this tremendous 20-man tournament for the Missouri State title.
Yes, when the promoters come up with this idea of a 20-man tournament, fine. Whose name did they call first? They called Blackjack Lanza Bobby Heenan for the simple reason, when you think of wrestling in St. Louis, you think of Heenan and Lanza and Heenan. Just look over the years. Who have we beaten? Von Erichs. We have beaten Bruiser, Gene Koniski, the Funks, the Briscoes. Look and read the rules, and you will see the results. Blackjack Lanza is #1 in St. Louis. And when this man and I show up in St. Louis on the 15th, there's only going to be one champion there. Forget the other 20 men.
All right, now, Bobby Heenan, this is obviously the cream of professional wrestling's crop. You talk about these great names. So many are going to be involved. Blackwell, Ken Patera, Ric Flair, Hercules Hernandez, Baron Von Raschke, Bob Orton Jr., Valentine, Bruiser, all of those names.
That's right. And when you can walk out of that ring with the Missouri State Championship after walking over and beating all these top professional wrestlers in the world today, you're recognized as somebody. You're on the next step of the ladder to wrestling for the NWA Championship. So all you other wrestlers, get ready, because there's only going to be one winner leave that ring with the Missouri belt, and that's this man right here. And Mr. Race, you get ready, because after we walk over the other 19 men, you know what's next, don't you?
I've got a
Harley Race. Look at the new Missouri State champion.
Well, it all remains to be seen. I thank you, Bobby Heenan, Blackjack Lanza, that big one, July the 15th, and we're going to be back with more.
Blackjack Lanza, sometimes I don't know what to make of his career. He was mostly a tag team guy in the 70s, teaming up with Blackjack Mulligan and then Bobby Duncombe. Then in 1979, he goes to Georgia with Bobby Heenan and gets this crazy push where they make him the Georgia heavyweight champion and the #1 heel in the promotion. Then after that, he disappears until like the middle of 1983. He comes out of retirement and he's back with the AWA.
One thing I will say about Jack Lanza is that, if you ask the average fan, why did the WWF succeed where the other promotions didn't? And they'll probably say, like, well, they had Hulk Hogan, they had Roddy Piper, they had Randy Savage. One thing I would say for Vince is that he made these behind-the-scenes moves of people within the business, like acquiring Jim Barnett, George Scott, and then lastly, Blackjack Lanza himself. I think Jack Lanza had a very key role behind the scenes in the AWA I think he believed he promoted Winnipeg. And when Jack Lanza finally came over to WWF, I think he made a foothold for them into Winnipeg. And he was not only really one of Vince's top road agents, but he was really involved heavily with working with the wrestlers on their promos, and he was really until the very end, and he lasted with Vince for 25 years or so, one of Vince's trusted allies. So that was a great pickup to bring him on the roster.
Steve, you may not believe this, but there has been a rumor out there that while the Blackjack Lanza was still working for the AWA, he was actually working for Vince McMahon. Shocker, huh?
Yeah, I have heard that rumor. That's interesting.
All right, so I'll tell you what. Let's hear now from the legendary Verne Gagne.
You've just seen exciting action featuring high flyer Greg Gagne. I want to bring in Greg's father, Verne Gagne, former world's heavyweight champ. Verne, a lot going on in the horse business, so to speak, and since we're in St. Louis, something happening very close.
Well, Gene, I just got to refer here to Greg. I thought he had an outstanding match here with Adonis. He had other ideas of becoming a football player when he came out of college, but wrestling really was in his blood, and that's where he lied. He forsook football, a chance to play with the Atlanta Falcons, and went into pro football. I'm very, very proud of that fact. I just wanted to mention that.
All right.
Yes, I am into the quarter horse business, shall we say, and as my hobby also. And I do have a great stallion.
Now that's at Cuba, Missouri?
At Cuba, Missouri, with my good trainer and good friend, Jody Gallion, and his beautiful wife, and the horses out there. And we got a stallion that we think is one of the top quarter horse stallions in America today. And so anybody that's interested in having quarter horses bred, Jody Gallion in Cuba, Missouri is the man to see.
All right. The man I've got to talk to about professional wrestling, you as a former champion. Here's a 20-man tournament, Verne, and wrestling's elite will be part of it.
Well, I do want to say, in all my years of wrestling, I don't think I've ever seen so many big names in any one tournament, for a one-day tournament in my whole life. It's going to be one of the great ones of all time. Thank you.
I thank you, ladies and gentlemen. He is former world's heavyweight champion, the legendary.
All right, so we're talking the wrestling business here. And Steve, you know this. When you watched wrestling back in the day, you saw commercials for, get off the couch, buddy, and learn a trade. Here, we'll give you a trade. We'll have you ready to go in a year doing HVAC or something. Here's where you can get a cheap car. Here's where you can get your muffler fixed inexpensively. But Verne's going to tell you also where you can get your quarter horse trained.
If you're watching TV back in the 70s or the 80s, and you're watching, say, the Merv Griffin show, and there's Merv on the sofa with, we'll say, William Shatner, who got a mention last week, and Shatner owns a whole bunch of horses, and he's got a horse farm in Kentucky. I mean, that's all well and good. He's a movie star, a TV star, and you expect that out of someone like Shatner. Now, Verne comes on the wrestling show, and you're expecting him to talk about wrestling, but because he's a rich guy and he owns the promotion, and I don't know if we're supposed to know that or not, but he has to go and brag about, the horses he owns, and, it just comes off just so highfalutin and so ridiculous. And, wrestling was always something for the blue collar people to watch and enjoy. I don't think he should have been doing that, but, he was the owner, and I think he did whatever the hell he wanted, I guess.
That's pretty much it. I mean, Verne, I think you kind of have to have that confidence, too. Like, you have to be able to say to yourself, hey, if I go out there and read the phone book, I'll be interesting. So quarter horses, hey, that's even more interesting than the phone booth. Those don't even exist anymore. Phone book, those don't exist anymore either. But final interview, let's hear from Ken Patera.
Impressive indeed. Strongman Ken Patera, the strongest man in professional wrestling. My guest, the man who is going to be part of that gigantic 20-man tournament for the Missouri State title.
You don't mind being corrected, do you? The world's strongest professional athlete, please.
All right.
And that includes wrestling, the king of sports. And everybody knows my credentials in the St. Louis area and everywhere else.
Let's talk about him, Ken Patera.
4 gold medals in the Pan American Games, Olympic team member, bronze medalist. 4 world championships, 4 national championships. Whatever Ken Patera set out to do, Ken Patera accomplished. And that's what I've always been number one, not only in my own eyes, but in the eyes of all the fans, whether wrestling, weightlifting, track and field, football, whatever it is. I always come to the top, and I'm going to come to the top again. 20 men in this tournament. It's probably the best collection of athletes ever in one spot in one given evening.
Ken Patera, this is wrestling's elite, the finest. You talk about a man like Hulk Hogan. Tremendous ability in the size of this man. Ric Flair, Crusher Blackwell, that list goes on and on and on.
That's right, a lot of ex-champions. And they're all looking for another championship so they can say that they're number one. And I'll tell you, I've had that Missouri State title twice. And I'm looking for it a 3rd time. Now, you have a guy like Hogan, 6'8.5", 341 pounds, beating up on a little movie actor, Sylvester Stallone, that's 5'11.5" and weighs 165 pounds. Now, you're a big man, Hogan, but you're not too big to be knocked down. And Blackwell, 480 pounds. You have Ric Flair, ex-NWA champion,
just defeated recently by Harley Race. So that made Harley Race vacate the Missouri State title. That's what it's all about. And you're looking at the man that's going to take it. And Harley Race, you're going to have to meet Ken Patera after I win this Missouri State title for the third consecutive time.
The big one on July the 15th. And, of course, be back here again next Sunday morning. In the meantime, keep looking.
Yeah, I listened to that Patera interview, and earlier I was like, you have all these heels that are screaming on the microphone, right, Steve? So if I'm in that dressing room and I'm in that interview room and I'm seeing all that, I'm like, I'm going to be out there. If I'm a heel, and I see all these guys screaming, I'm going to go out there. I'm going to whisper. I'm going to talk slowly and calmly and quietly. I'm going to separate myself from the pack, much like Ken Patera, for the most part, did in that interview.
Yeah, what you're describing is the interview of Jake Roberts. Jake Roberts was a phenomenal interview, but he was always almost talking in a whisper or a quiet voice. But that made you get your ears open and pay attention and get closer to the TV or turn up the volume because you figured whatever it is he's saying must be really important. And it is nice to see somebody that's so different than the rest. It really makes them stand out.
That's the thing in pro wrestling. Even before 1984, when the gimmicks became more and more outrageous and guys had to do more to stand out, you had to do what you needed to do to stand out in this business. A lot of guys want that spot that Ken Patera had.
Yeah, Ken Patera was a great wrestler, and it's sad that people think more about the McDonald's incident than his career because what he did in mainly the WWF, somewhat in the AWA, should be really fondly remembered by wrestling fans. Fondly
remembered by me. I mean, I will tell you that in 1983, if you had asked me, who should be the next NWA champion, Ken Patera would absolutely have been on the list. WWF champion in 83, he would have been at the top of my list. So, I have nothing but respect for the guy. He, had a great run in Georgia. He had a great run in St. Louis. Great runs all over the place.
Yeah, actually, if anybody is interested, if you go on Google and do a search for AWA results from '84, and if you just do your friendly Control F, you can put in St. Louis and just look at the St. Louis shows. And it's amazing. Patera's on quite a few of these shows from '84. And there's one card on here that blew my mind as far as just the main matches on it. The main event that I'm talking about was from September of '84, NWA champion Ric Flair against Harley Race. And listen to this tag team championship match. AWA tag team champions, the Road Warriors, defeated Dick the Bruiser and Blackjack Lanza. What a weird match that is.
Yeah.
And then there was another show where the Road Warriors defended against the Funk Brothers, which was really amazing. Actually, the October show in St. Louis, and Martel and Harley went to a 60-minute draw for the AWA championship. So really interesting to see these matchups that weren't frequently happening, just kind of like one-off matches.
No, when Sam Mushnick retired, St. Louis changed dramatically and kind of for the worse. They had the split in the promotion, and then, it just kind of went downhill quite quickly, but they did have some fun shows in '83 and '84. Steve, it has been a longer program than usual, but I think we've entertained the Stick to Wrestling universe.
Well, it's always interesting to give the AWA a shout out. It doesn't get much love, but here we gave it a good hour plus today.
We did, and this is not the last you're going to hear about AWA in 1983. We are going to have tentatively Brad Brightsman on at some point. We'll do a complete review of the AWA during that year. So, Steve, I want to thank you for taking the time and joining us on Stick to Wrestling once again.
Thanks, John. It was great to be here, and I look forward to our next episode.
Definitely same here. I want to thank Brian Last for giving us this forum. I want to thank Lou Kippelman for all the great work he does producing this. Believe me, if we just let it fly raw, it wouldn't be that good. And this has been a production of the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network. We'll see you guys next week.
This concludes our podcast day.